The thing that really got me going on studying whales was one day there was a report on the radio that a dolphin had gone ashore somewhere, and I thought, wow, and so I went out to see it. By the time I got there, it was light. In fact, it was dark. I had a flashlight. It was raining. And I looked down at this dolphin. Somebody had carved their initials on the side of the dolphin. Somebody else had stuck a cigar in its blowhole. Somebody else had hacked off its tail. I stood there in the rain for a long time. At some point, the flashlight went out. I was thinking, why is it that this is the interaction that most whales can expect from humans? Why is this what happens? At that point, I decided, no, I will do something to change what I do in life, to try to have some effect on this. When that idea occurred to me, was the greatest sense of emancipation I've ever felt in my life, because I could finally answer the question, towards what end is my life lived? To say to myself, I want to change people's perceptions of the wild world and the importance of it. And I knew that's what I wanted to spend my life doing. It was a kind of flood of happiness. I don't quite know how to describe it.
Let me see. Well, I can think of the right whale, the bowhead whale, the common dolphin, the hooked-beak whale. There's the sperm whale, the beluga, the narwhal, the humpback, the right whale, the gray whale, orca, bottlenose dolphin, pilot whale, pygmy sperm whale, blue whale, fin whale. Wait, I've got another one. It's on the tip of my tongue. Wait.
When you're swimming with a whale, you are, of course, in their medium, very deep ocean, way over your head, a few thousand feet over your head. I'm not a very good swimmer. I always felt a little like I was, rolling around in a straitjacket in front of a tiger. I had no idea what was going to happen. And I was completely incapable of avoiding anything that would happen. The first time I ever went swimming with a whale was with a humpback whale in Bermuda. We were coming home. The day was over. We'd finished our work, and we were roaring along, and suddenly there, right in front of us, was a whale. We had never seen it. Nobody had swum with whales up until then. I thought, oh, who cares if it's safe? It's interesting and beautiful. So I went in the water. Here was this monstrous, huge, graceful thing. It looked me over, I looked it over, and it made no move against me. It was the most fabulous experience I'd ever had. A big blue whale can weigh about 150 tons. That's a large animal. And when you see a large whale, you see grace magnified to a point which you have never seen the equal of before. It's just pure fluidity. The whole animal bends and moves in fashions which the finest dancer would just envy blind. It's a wonderful, fabulous personal experience, but you don't learn a lot from the whale. The whale spends its whole time looking you over, and so you're not really seeing any natural behavior. right whales in Argentina, you dive down next to them. They then dominate you. They will swim right over the top of you, and if there's 3 feet of water beneath you before you get to the bottom, you get crowded into that space, and it's very scary. But they don't hurt you. They don't carry through on it. It's all threats. Some evidence of the way the whale treats you comes through in its behavior. And then you realize, this animal's not going to hurt me. All the stuff that got said about whales by the old whalers, the bravery of it, the machismo of it, and so it's not true. It's lies. Simple lies. Of course, if you're trying to kill one, it's different. And the whale, mercy me, defends itself. What an evidence of a vicious creature that is. But if you go out after them and you don't try to kill them, it was very evident that they're not going to hurt you at all. When it turns in the water and moves its body around, you feel everything washing and rolling, and you think, my word, am I going to live through this? But you do. You always do. At first, they would kill whales, drag them ashore, flense them, which is a fancy word for cutting the skin off them and cutting them up. And then they would go out and go get another whale and bring it in. But then eventually the trips to get whales became too far, and they started flensing the whales by tying them to the side of the boat and cutting them up from there. When James Cook, Captain Cook, went down to the Antarctic, he saw so many whales that he could not look off his ship without seeing several blows going on all at the same time. He reported this when he got back, and people immediately thought, aha. Now the species they were trying to hunt there in the Antarctic, the most abundant ones, were very hard to catch. But when a new mechanized industry was developed, and people could inflate these whales with air because they sink, the body of the whale sinks if you don't, then the Antarctic went from an area where you could see thousands of whales to one like I've just seen. I think we saw 2 whales. Now you're talking about the absolute ground zero central concentration of whales in the world, and it's been decimated, gone. Why? Well, because of greed. They started big industrial operations, high-speed chaser boats which have a cannon on the bow, which shoot a harpoon that weighs about 200 pounds into the whale that has an explosive tip on it. There are records of whales being killed only after 4 hours and 9 harpoons. It's a horrible way to kill an animal. It would be hard to imagine a worse one. The numbers of kills were simply staggering. About 10% of the total population of blue whales was killed in 1 year. If you can kill animals at a rate like that, there's no hope for them at all, absolutely none. Well, finally people realized, oh, I see, well, maybe we have a problem here. So they founded an organization eventually, which was called the International Whaling Commission. It has basically sat over the near extinction of most species. Some of the species have been knocked down to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% of their original numbers. So you couldn't call it a big success. They are now electrocuted to death. Why? Well, because that harpoon kind of destroys too much meat. It takes away the value of the whale. The best way to do it is to use a smaller harpoon, not with an explosive tip, and then electrocute the whale with a long prod. And when you watch a whale being electrocuted, it's disgusting. There's nothing about it which isn't totally revolting. Now, none of that would happen if people could ever see it. And the whaling industry is determined to make sure that you don't see it. I was raised in New York City. Very happy childhood and very happy family, a very normal family. Well, not normal for these times, but normal for those times. My father was an electrical engineer at the Bell Labs. My mother was a musician. And she taught me a love for music that was enormous, and my father taught me a love for sailing. And so both those things have really been the hallmarks of my life. I used to walk around in New York City looking up so that I didn't have to see the buildings. And I saw what I thought were hawks, but it turned out to be seagulls later on. And then finally I went to the country, and when I was in the country, I realized for the first time that this was the most wonderful place that existed. Everything I did from then on was designed to try to get out into the country. That's what I wanted to do. I had a biology teacher, which is, I think, one of the reasons I went into biology. She lent me a book one time. It was a precious thing in my life at that point. I kept it for a matter of, I don't know, probably half a year and practically memorized it. It was about birds, and that is where I think my interest in biology first began. I wanted to have some kind of world where music could have something to do with what I did. I knew I wasn't good enough as a musician. Nobody would ever pay a nickel to hear me play anything. So what I really wanted to do is I wanted to do something which involved music. And that's why I got interested in sound and how it affects animals, because that's something I could do safely with no real musical talent. I started out my career studying bats. For my PhD, I worked on owls, and then I worked on moths. As a friend of mine once said, other fly-by-night organisms. And these are all animals for which sound is really important. I spent about 5 years as a postdoc doing work on moths, and I began to think, well, hey, what I'm doing has no relevance to what I know is so incredibly important, and that is the condition of the wild world. Well, hey, if the only thing you know is about sound with animals, what can you do that matters? And I thought, whales. Ah. I'd never seen a whale, no idea what they even looked like. I decided if I could service that interest in sound, that then maybe I could affect the lives of whales, because at that time we were killing about 35,000 of them each year. When I got going on studying whales, there was a lot of machismo baloney. The man is out there struggling against all the problems of the world, and it's a lot of crap. The person is actually out there missing his family, wondering what's going on at home, worrying about the kids, the wife, and so on. The important thing to do is to take your family with you. And so I did, and it was really difficult to do. A lot of people thought, oh, tut, 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 you know, this guy's not really doing serious work if he's got his family with him. But it worked. And my kids stayed with me, and the result is that 3 out of 4 of them have gone into conservation biology. And the 4th one is an acrobat in the Cirque du Soleil, and he's the one we're all so jealous of, we can hardly face it. We started going to Patagonia in 1970, and my kids, the youngest of them at the time was about 6, and the oldest about 9.5. 4 kids, 3.5 years apart. It was as close as you can pack them, pretty much. And we lived on the shore of a bay in which the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. The bay was absolutely deserted of all but us. You could look out and see nothing, not a single evidence of humanity in any direction. The longest period we ever went was for 22 months. We lived in tents the first year. Later we built a cinder block house. And the kids grew up in that environment. They played with sea lions. They played with rheas, these flightless birds, rather like an ostrich. And they have always, in their lives, had that bond, which I think is so incredibly important. That came from Patagonia. That came from the infinite south, from the oceans, from the whales. And it's something that's steeped in their souls. At night, the whales would come into the bay and their breathing would awaken you. About as lovely an interruption to sleep as one could imagine.
Hello, I'm Jordan, and today I'll tell you a bit about whales. Whales and dolphins and porpoises are called cetaceans. There are nearly 80 different kinds of cetaceans. Scientists divided them into two different groups: baleen whales and toothed whales. Blue whales and minke whales are examples of baleen whales. Baleen whales eat small fish and crustaceans, which they filter through giant furry sieves in their mouths.
Humpback whales cooperate when they feed. They gather around a school of minnows, and one whale might blow bubbles out of its blowhole and kind of make a spiral around the fish that would press the school of fish together, and then all the whales circling around the school of fish, they would just go in and eat all they can.
Toothed whales include all dolphins and porpoises, as well as bigger whales like sperm whales and killer whales. Toothed whales eat larger fish and squid. Killer whales sometimes eat other sea mammals and even other whales bigger than themselves. The biggest whale is the blue whale. It is probably the biggest creature to ever have lived on this planet. The average length is nearly 100 feet. Its heart is the size of a VW beetle. A small adult could crawl through the aorta. A child could walk. Oh look, I'm walking through a whale's body. La-di-da-di-da. The tongue can weigh 4 tons. It weighs more than an elephant. The external part of the ear is very small, the size of the tip of a pencil. The eye is the size of a teacup. With a single breath, a blue whale could inflate up to 2,000 balloons.
The importance of the size of these whales is that very little bothers them. To a whale, there is practically nothing that whale is disturbed by. So it can afford to live life in a peaceful fashion. It can afford, basically, to, sleep at night, not worry about anything else around it. It can explore the world and approach it with a confidence that no other species has except us. And even we don't have it, I believe, at the depth that whales have it. Largeness is so important. It's important for us to feel small. There's very little that makes us feel small. It's a good experience. We don't get access to it very often. When you get next to something that is so vastly bigger than you are, and so vastly stronger, and so vastly more skilled in its element than you are, you then begin to have respect that you don't otherwise get access to in yourself. Whales do this in a way which is wonderful, something which can change our lives, and change our lives in a way that will save us from ourselves, from our own super arrogance about what we really are. We like to think of ourselves as the star of the show, the main act, but we aren't. We're just a walk-on. I think we have to basically sit back, relax, and learn how to be what we are, which is a very interesting species, but just another pretty face. That's all we are.
I have two favorite kinds of whales. I have one favorite toothed whale, which is the sperm whale, and it's the biggest toothed whale. And I have one favorite baleen whale, and it is the humpback whale.
The reason why I like the humpback is just, it's an awesome whale. It can do so much stuff, and it's huge.
My favorite whale is the narwhal, because it looks like it has a horn. My favorite whale is the blue whale, because he's the biggest animal. My favorite whale is the common dolphin, because I think it's cute.
There are wonderful, extraordinary things that dolphins have done. There's a description of a dolphin baby that came over to the window in its tank, and there was a guy smoking and blowing out smoke. And the baby went over it, nursed for a moment on its mother, and came back and blew out a little puff of milk against the screen, which looked, of course, just like the guy's smoke. There are all sorts of evidences of a kind of mind which is a very familiar mind to us. It's like ours. For example, there are dolphins which save people who are drowning, and there is no question at all that that's what dolphins do. I mean, there was a woman, a friend of mine, who studied this phenomenon and discovered, she asked various people who claimed to have been saved by dolphins questions that they couldn't have known the answer to unless it had actually happened to them, like, where on the body did the dolphin press against you? What more could one species do for another than to save its life? The rarest whale in the world is something called Lepotes that lives in the Yangtze River in China. It is a species which is down to about a handful.
Chi-Chi is a male Lipote dolphin. He was caught accidentally by fishermen in 1980. Around 1982, there were about 400 Lipotes in the Yangtze River. In 86, we found there were less than 300. And by 94, there were less than 100.
I had a friend who spent much of his life as a vet working with dolphins in captivity. He said that was the smartest dolphin he'd ever seen. So maybe we're about to lose the smartest of all the dolphins.
Now, the reason for this phenomenon is not because Lipotes are an inherently weak species and therefore should be extinct. They're not like the dinosaur whose extinction was unrelated to man. Although every species has a process from its blossom to its wane, the Lipote dolphin's process has been accelerated by the activities of man: fisheries, transportation, river pollution, and dam construction. If we're not careful, they will quickly disappear.
Human beings and their behavior have driven extinction rates up in this world by 10,000 times, and that's just an example of the global experiment that we are carrying out with the natural systems of this world. "35 years ago, when I started working on whales, the obvious thing that was killing them was the whaling industry. That was that. But now, other threats that have appeared and are growing larger and larger are really of concern. For example, pollution.
This voyage of the Odyssey that we're on right now is what I consider to be the most important research with which I've ever been involved in my life. We're collecting fats from sperm whales that we then analyze for their pollutants. The fish in the sea that we eat now are so polluted by so many compounds that some of them are simply not safe to eat. One is warned against eating very large examples, that means they're very old, and have had a long lifetime to accumulate lots of substances in them that are bad for you. If you have fish which have 2 parts per million of PCBs, PCBs are one of the substances that pollute these animals, you are allowed to sell them as food. If they have more than that, you aren't. If they have 50 parts per million, you have to consider that they are toxic waste and you have to dispose of them in special facilities. Killer whales have been found with concentrations as high as 400 parts per million. 50 parts per million, you have to dispose of them in special facilities. Beluga whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, 3,200 parts per million. And bottlenose dolphins, 6,800 parts per million. These animals are swimming toxic dump sites. They would be eligible for cleanup under the Superfund laws. If you could clean them up, you can't. There's no way to clean them up. That problem is a serious problem, and it affects whales as well as it affects people. It affects anything that lives at the top of an oceanic food chain. Well, where do we live? At the tops of oceanic food chains.
I know whales came from ancient land creatures, more like wolf or dog-looking creatures. and they started to get closer to the water, and they developed into bigger, more dinosaur-like looking things, and then they developed fins and everything, and they became whales. It took like a long time.
The thing that interests most people about whales is their enormous brain. I mean, what's it there for? What are they using it for? And the answer is nobody knows. The brain of a human being weighs about 1/10 as much as the brain of a sperm whale. And you could say, yes, sure, but of course the sperm whale, being such a large animal, needs all that brain tissue in order to run all of its systems. And the answer is not entirely. If you look at the levels of organization of the cortex, that fancy part of our brain that makes us so proud to be human, you find that there may be, in fact, amongst dolphins, another layer, one higher than the layer that we have. Does that mean I think that dolphins are poet philosophers who can do string physics and all this kind of thing? And the answer is no, I don't believe that at all. Unlikely that they have the same sort of way of looking at the world that we do, because else they would have destroyed the world. They've had plenty of time to do it, but they haven't done so. Now, people could say, yes, that's because they don't have an opposable thumb. But if you weighed 150 tons, you could do a lot of damage. You could do a lot of foolish things. And somehow, whales have not done so. They have continued to exist. So what it says is a wonderfully valuable lesson. You can own this big, fancy piece of equipment without destroying the world. They've done it. And I think we have much to learn from them. How to live in a world without destroying it. If we could somehow temper our arrogance enough to learn it from them. That is the incredibly unique contribution that whales make to man. We've gone, I think, from save the whales to saved by the whales. I was in the engine room of a ship in Bermuda, and a friend of mine said, well, listen to this. And he put this tape on, and I was completely blown away. I mean, I had never heard anything like it from the wild world, nothing even approaching it. It was utterly beautiful. I was just stunned. What is this? You're saying this is a humpback? And he said, yeah, and he could demonstrate it. And so I began making recordings myself. And with another friend, a guy named Scott McVeigh, we started listening and listening, and eventually heard that these songs were long, repeated, rhythmic sequences of sounds. They were songs by anybody's definition of a song. A song is a long, repeated sequence of sound. And we were able to lay out the sounds in a visual form. The thing is called a sound spectrograph. Then you could see that the patterns went on for about 15 minutes and whoa, came back and repeated themselves again and went on and did it the whole song again. The sounds these whales make, a lot of people react to it by weeping. A lot of people are completely silenced.
When I hear whale songs, I just kind of feel, it's hard to explain. I get kind of caught up in it.
The noises somehow tie into our senses of great loss, tragedy. To me, the most interesting connection between whales and people is that whales use many of the same laws in their compositions of songs that human composers use in their compositions. They even incorporate rhyme in their songs. That's another discovery of my former wife, Payne. When a whale is singing a very complicated song, it actually uses rhyming endings every now and then to phrases that it sings. For instance, the whales have some sounds which go sort of, and then they go, now if later on they change that first to be which is a very common thing, they break it up into notes, they will still keep the rhyming ending on it. And as that change occurs, it will maintain that rhyming ending. So my suspicion is that this commonality of musical experience in whales and people is a demonstration of the fact that singing is far, far older than our species. It is something we have inherited from ancestors so distant that we don't understand it. I think it's why it's so hard to explain to somebody why it is that you sing. So what? Why sing? Why make music? It's impossible to give a voice to why that is done. Why is it important? Why not do something else? The answer is it's absolutely at the center of our being. I think the fact that whales and humans were separated for such a long period of time means that there has been a parallel track down which the vertebrate brain has been selecting for things that work, and guess what? It's the same in a whale and in a human being. We're both entertained by the same kinds of things. That tells you what it is that makes whales so attractive to people, is that they are singing in an emotional language that we don't really fully understand, but which resonates like mad with us. The most exciting moment, I think, in my career was one night when I had been designing little apparatuses to put on a whale that would make a noise and then I could follow the whale. And we had to make these things be heard for a distance of a mile or more. And a friend of mine had taught me the formulas that enable you to figure out how far away you can hear a sound under the water. And I thought, I wonder how far you could hear a whale. And I made a calculation of how far would these sounds be heard, and I realized, my Lord, they can be heard thousands of miles. And so I finally wrote this up with this same friend of mine, and we published it, and it almost ruined my career. They couldn't tolerate that kind of an idea, and the result was people went after my sources of funds, they went after me as a person. It was disgusting. And then one time I was at a meeting and I gave a paper, and the meeting was all a bunch of mathematicians, and the paper was supposed to last for an hour. It lasted 5 hours because they stopped me all the time, asked me questions. And when it was all over, their conclusion was, well, your calculation is very conservative. You know, these whales are hearing each other a lot farther than you think they are. And that was the most thrilling moment, was first thinking it up, and then later, after being punished by criticism from people who didn't really know about it, finally having it come through that, oh yes, these sounds do travel that distance.
In the early 70s, I listened through a number of hours of recordings that Roger Payne had made with underwater microphones near Bermuda. And I happened upon a phrase that the whale sang that I could play on the soprano sax. And what I wanted to do then was have the theme for this piece be actually composed by a whale so that I could say that this was a real collaboration with the whale and give the whale composing credits.
I spent 2 years traveling all over the country with a tape recorder and playing sounds to people through headphones of humpback songs to get their reaction to them. This had a reaction on humans that you'd never seen the likes of before, and I realized, this is the way you can get people interested in saving whales. You can let them hear their sounds. And then I set out to do that. I put out a record of whale called Songs of the Humpback Whale. It became a bestseller. The National Geographic Society was supporting our work, and they got interested in maybe doing a record too, back in the days when there used to be flexible records inside a book or a magazine. And so we did an article, and the Geographic put out a recording. And at the time, they had 10.5 million members, so they had to print 10.5 million copies. And that was, and still is, I might say, the single largest print order in the history of the recording industry.
Roger's recording, the Songs of the Humpback Whales, had probably done more for the cause of whales than all of the print and the symposia put together.
Greenpeace started back in the 60s, and it was interested in stopping nuclear testing by the French in the Pacific. And when it got involved with whales, it just changed the scene completely. Here were people who were willing to go out and get between whales and the boat that was trying to kill the whales, and at times harpoons were fired directly over their heads, practically killing the people in the boat. It was real theater. It was something that got the attention of the world. And that made all the difference. It suddenly went from people kind of caring, or a few people caring, to everybody being just fascinated by what was going on. Of course, that was a time when there was this huge countercultural movement. The Vietnam War was making a huge difference, and it was uniting everybody who were opposed to it. And that force carried people on. They began to see that they could do things together if they really operated together.
Dr. Roger Payne. Thanks, that's great.
They could make a difference. They could make a change. They began to win some things.
And without realizing it myself, I said that I felt I really didn't want to live in a world without whales. My feeling is, no, that is too much madness.
And a lot of strange and lovely things began to come into it. John Perry made an inflated whale, and he took it all over the world. It was fascinating, the things he did. He was a kind of Pied Piper who led people using this whale he called Flo.
It was exhilarating because we really felt that we were having an effect. We knew we were getting out to an awful lot of people. And Flo became such a symbol with the Save the Whale movement itself. So there wasn't a Save the Whale event, whether a rally or a concert or whatever, that she wasn't invited to. And then as the years went by, which is only a few years, we're talking about a period of 5 or 6 years, the votes in the International Whaling Commission gradually started to stack more and more in favor of the whales.
It all added up to what was, I believe, the first and most important, perhaps, starting step in getting the global environmental movement underway. It was a huge success story. And I thought we'd saved whales, but I was wrong. To make it possible to continue, a wonderful scam has been invented by the whalers called scientific whaling. It is an allowed activity under the International Whaling Commission when there is a moratorium present. And what it is, actually, is the same people hunting the same whales, using the same equipment in the same places and selling them to the same markets. But now it's science. The International Whaling Commission protects only species which are defined in the loosest way as whales. So you get these hideous aberrations like the Faroese whaling on pilot whales. It is a festival of machismo brutality. The newest, best scam of all is to say, we got to get rid of those whales before they kill all our fish. This is something that plays wonderfully to people who are completely unfamiliar with the truth. There's a classic example of this that occurred off the Aleutian Islands. Back in the 40s and 50s, the big whales in the Aleutian Islands were basically wiped out, pretty nearly wiped out. There's some left, but they had been one of the major foods, apparently, for orcas, the killer whales. Now what happened is the orcas had to feed on something else, so they switched to something called stellar sea lions, which is a huge species, and they soon clobbered those down. Well, then they switched to northern sea lions, a smaller but more plentiful species. Well, they clobbered those, so they went to sea otters and wrecked them. Now, sea otters, their main prey is something called sea urchins, and sea urchins eat kelp. So the result was the sea otter population collapsed, the sea urchin population exploded and ate the kelp forests right down to their roots. Now there was no place to hide for the larval forms of ocean fish of the species that we really want, and the result was the fisheries collapsed. And that brought people who were fishing into bankruptcy. 40 years ago when this started, the whalers thought they were killing whales. What they were really killing was the larval forms of the fish that we want, destroying that fishery and putting 21st century fishers out of business.
Now what is happening is that Japanese whalers are trying to change the ruling and get rid of the moratorium.
Japan is likely to renew its call for the ban on commercial whaling to be lifted, and it might get its way.
The International Whaling Commission imposed a ban on commercial hunting nearly 20 years ago. Anti-whaling countries have held sway for more than 2 decades, but at this year's annual meeting in Sorrento, environmentalists fear new members to the commission could tip the balance.
The Japanese government is bribing developing nations into the International Whaling Commission to get more force behind their interests, which is whaling.
Should we allow whaling to begin again, to get rid of the moratorium, which was passed in the 1980s, and go back to commercial whaling? If we do, how stupid would we have to be to think there's any reason at all that this kind of cheating is going to stop? Letting whaling begin again is an absolute disaster. I see my life's work, which I've been doing for about the last 35 years on whaling, just being dismantled in front of my eyes. It's a horrible feeling. We're talking about an animal that did no harm to man, an animal which had lived on Earth for millions of years unmolested, an animal which has the largest of all brains, an animal which can sing songs. If we can't save whales, we can't save anything.
I do not think human beings are more important than other species. Considering what humans have done and what they are doing are making them less important, kind of. I think that if they were to help nature more, they would become more important in the cycle of life.
Margaret Mead was once asked, do you think that a single individual can make a difference? And as she pointed out, it's the only thing that ever has made a difference. People don't realize that they can do it. They can change the world. You know, there's nothing to it. All people have to do is to change their minds. And that's something that is in their own power. And if they can decide to do that, yeah, we can change the world. And if we do that, we will be the greatest generation that ever lived in the history of the human race. Nobody will ever have had an opportunity, a shot at greatness as much as we have. If we fail to do that, we will be the most vilified in history, because people will know we knew what was going on. We recognized the fact that the earth was falling apart, and we did nothing that really mattered. When people finally understand what it is that's wrong in this world, they act fast. They act so fast that you can't even react. Classic example that we've all lived through, the falling of the Soviet state and the falling of the Berlin Wall. That happened so quickly that the United States government had nothing to say about it, just happened. That kind of thing that we have done in the past gives me huge hope that once people decide to make a change, they'll do it, and they'll do it so quickly that you'll just watch.